I still remember the day everything changed. The phone was silent in my hand, but the words still echoed through the walls of my house, loud, sharp, unforgettable. The air felt heavy, the room suddenly unfamiliar, as if my whole life had shifted in a single breath. And then he said it. "We don't need you. Stop calling us." My son, the same boy whose tiny fingers once wrapped around mine, as if I was his entire world. The same child who used to run into my arms after school, laughing, breathless, asking, "Mom, did you miss me?" Now his voice was cold, distant, final. I didn't cry. Shock doesn't give you permission for tears. Instead, I stood there, staring at nothing, realizing something far more painful than loneliness. You can spend your whole life building a family and still end up feeling like a stranger in it. The day he let go of me. The words still lingered long after the call ended, heavy like smoke in a room with no open window. "We don't need you. Stop calling us." I stared at the phone as if it might apologize for repeating his voice. My hand trembled slightly, not because of fear, but because my body didn't yet know what to do with the pain. The house felt colder, though it was the middle of spring. Outside, sunlight poured through the windows and danced across the hardwood floor, but I didn't feel warmth, not even a little. It was strange how a moment could change the temperature of a home, how a sentence could echo louder than any scream. For years, my home had been filled with noise laughter, footsteps, slammed bedroom doors, cartoons playing too loudly, the rhythm of a life shared with others. Now there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of a clock that seemed impatient for something I no longer had. Purpose. Silence can be peaceful, but sometimes silence feels like punishment. I placed the phone face down on the table, as if refusing to see it could erase the memory. I waited, maybe for him to call back, maybe for the universe to tell me this was some kind of misunderstanding, but nothing changed. The room stayed still. My heartbeat slowly settled, but the ache inside me did not. Some mothers lose children to war, some to illness, some to accidents, but losing a child to a distance made not of miles, but of resentment. That kind of loss feels invisible and somehow more cruel. I pulled out a chair and sat at the kitchen table. The wood was cool beneath my palms, a reminder that this world wasn't going to pause just because mine had. My tea was still sitting there from earlier, half full, untouched, now cold. The steam had vanished long ago. So had something else, a piece of motherhood, a piece of me. People say a parent should never have expectations. They say children don't owe love, only life. But those people have clearly never stayed awake at 3 a.m, holding a feverish child against their chest, praying with everything they have, "Please stay with me. I can't exist without you." They've never gone hungry so their child wouldn't, never worked 2 jobs and still came home smiling so the house wouldn't feel heavy, never used the last of their own energy just to help with homework, or listen, or simply be there. Love leaves fingerprints, and mine were all over his life. So why did he wipe them away? I leaned back and let my eyes close, not to sleep, but to remember. Memories came quickly, as if waiting to be called. Ethan at 5 holding a broken toy truck with tearful eyes. Ethan at 12, nervous before his first school presentation. Ethan at 16, laughing with his friends as they planned a future none of them could predict. And then, Ethan at 28, the man who stopped calling for advice. The man who only shared his life in brief updates. The man who eventually built a world where I didn't belong. Maybe the separation didn't happen suddenly. Maybe it began with small things, shorter conversations, fewer visits, unreturned messages. Maybe losing someone isn't one moment. Maybe it's thousands of small cuts you don't feel until you're bleeding. My phone buzzed. My heart leaped, foolishly, hoping it was him. It wasn't. A bank notification, a reminder, Life continues even when love doesn't. I let out a slow breath and stood up. The floor creaked beneath my feet, an old, familiar sound. Once that creak meant someone was home. Now it only meant the house was aging with me. I walked to the window and looked outside. Across the street, a young mother knelt beside her toddler who was learning to walk. The child stumbled, fell, and burst into tears. The mother lifted him gently, kissed his forehead, whispered something, and placed him back on his feet. He tried again, and again, and again. I watched until he took 2 steps without falling, and the mother clapped with pure joy. That used to be me, not just once, thousands of times. And now, no one claps for me. No one notices whether I fall or stand. Later that evening, as the sky shifted to shades of orange and then purple, I finally cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet grief of someone who had hoped too long, the kind of tears that don't fall quickly, but slow, heavy, meaningful. Each one felt like a goodbye to who I was, to who he used to be, to the life I thought would last. I didn't know it then, but life was not finished with me. 3 months later, at 2:14 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my son. It was his wife. Her voice was shaky, desperate, afraid. "Please," she whispered, "we need you." And in that moment, before she explained anything, before I asked questions, before I even breathed, I felt something powerful. Motherhood doesn't end when a child rejects you. It waits, quietly, patiently, ready to return the moment life reminds them. No matter how far you run, you will always need the person who never stopped loving you. Cracks in the walls, the morning light seeped through the blinds in pale, hesitant streaks, and for the first time in weeks, I noticed how empty my house had become. The silence was not peaceful. It was oppressive, pressing in from all sides. Each creak of the floorboards, each faint hum of the refrigerator felt exaggerated, amplified by absence. The walls, once echoing with laughter and chatter, now seemed to mock me with their stillness. I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone that had delivered those life-altering words still on the nightstand. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I had tried to imagine that maybe it had been a mistake, a moment of anger, a miscommunication. But the echo of his voice, cold, final, dismissive, told me otherwise. "We don't need you. Stop calling us." I closed my eyes, letting the memory wash over me again. The boy I had raised, who once ran to me with scraped knees and tears in his eyes, who once whispered, "Mom, stay with me," had now drawn a wall between us, a barrier that I could not climb, and I wondered, for the 1,000th time, when that wall had begun to take shape. The signs had been subtle at first: missed phone calls, shorter visits, polite but distant smiles. I had excused each one, thinking it was just part of growing up, part of becoming independent. But independence, I was learning, sometimes manifests as rejection. I rose and walked through the rooms of my house, each familiar corner feeling alien. The living room, once the heart of our home, with its worn couch and scattered cushions, now seemed like a museum of a life that no longer included me. I ran my fingers over the arm of the sofa, remembering how Ethan used to climb over it, how he had once fallen asleep there with a comic book clutched in his small hands. It was strange how memory could be both comforting and painful. Each recollection of laughter and warmth now carried a sharp edge, a reminder of what had been lost. I wandered into the kitchen, the scent of old coffee lingering in the air. I had left a cup out the night before, a futile attempt at normalcy, but even that small ritual now felt meaningless. I pressed my palms against the cold counter and closed my eyes. I thought about the years I had spent shaping him, guiding him, protecting him. I remembered the nights I had stayed awake, soothing fevers and nightmares, the mornings I had prepared his breakfast even when my own stomach ached with exhaustion. I remembered working 2 jobs just to keep the household afloat, never complaining, always smiling, always assuring him that everything would be all right. And now, none of it mattered. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared countless breakfasts, lunches, and late-night snacks. I let my hands rest on the wood, imagining the tiny fingers that had once held mine. I could almost feel them again, warm and trusting. But that warmth had vanished. I had always believed that love was enough, that the sacrifices I had made, the sleepless nights, the endless worry and care would anchor our bond. But love, I was learning, cannot always prevent distance. Sometimes, no matter how much you give, it is never enough. I thought about the cracks that had formed over the years, the small disagreements and misunderstandings I had ignored, the moments when I'd been too tired to listen, too busy to notice. Perhaps they had seemed insignificant at the time, but accumulated over the years, they had grown into chasms, and now those chasms had swallowed the connection I had cherished most. I walked to the window and looked outside. Across the street, a young mother knelt beside her toddler, encouraging him as he took tentative steps. The child stumbled and fell, but she lifted him gently, whispered words of reassurance, and set him back on his feet. He tried again and again, until finally he walked without falling. She clapped with joy, her face radiant with pride and relief. I watched until the sun reflected off the asphalt, imagining myself in that position, wishing I could feel that kind of accomplishment again. But my applause would never come. My son, the one I had raised with love and care, would not turn to me. The weeks passed slowly. Days bled into each other, each indistinguishable from the last. I kept myself busy with mundane tasks, cleaning, cooking, walking through the neighborhood. But the emptiness followed me everywhere. It was in the way I noticed the quiet chairs, the still air, the dust that settled in corners without disturbance. It was in the way I found myself speaking aloud, only to realize that no one would answer. I tried to reach him again carefully, with messages filled with gentle words, with offers to help, with invitations to share meals. Each time the silence that followed was deafening. The rejection was not harsh in tone, but it was absolute. He had built walls I could not scale, and yet, despite everything, I could not let go entirely. My heart refused to abandon the love that had nurtured him from birth. I reminded myself that motherly love does not end when it is unreciprocated. It waits, quietly, hoping for the moment when it will be needed again. It was during one of these long, silent nights that I began to understand something fundamental. The world does not always move in the directions we want it to. Children grow, life changes, relationships shift. What we believe to be permanent can vanish in an instant. And yet, even in the face of loss, resilience is born. I started keeping a journal, writing down memories, feelings, fears, and fragments of hope. Each page became a small act of resistance against despair. I recorded the tiny moments of beauty I still encountered, the sunlight on the living room floor, the smell of rain on dry earth, the laughter of neighbors' children. I reminded myself that life continues, even when it seems unbearably lonely. One afternoon, I ventured into the city, wandering aimlessly through familiar streets. I passed the bookstore where I had once taken Ethan as a child, letting him pick out his favorite stories. I saw families laughing together, couples holding hands, children chasing each other in parks. And in that chaos of life moving forward, I felt both pain and a strange sense of belonging. I belonged to the world, even if my son had temporarily removed me from his life. It was during this walk that I noticed the subtle ways people navigate their own cracks. A man quietly helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, a young woman comforting her friend on a park bench, a street musician playing a song that seemed to capture a million unspoken emotions. I realized that even when one part of life collapses, there is still beauty, still connection, still the possibility of repair. Returning home, I felt a tentative spark of hope. Not for reconciliation, at least not yet, but for my own strength. I would not allow rejection to define me. I would not let the absence of my son's affection erase the years of love and care I had poured into him. And so I began to prepare not for revenge, not for confrontation, but for the day when life might demand that I step back into his world. I began to strengthen myself emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I read books on resilience, attended small community gatherings, and reconnected with friends who reminded me of who I was outside of motherhood. I also reflected on the lessons I could share, the wisdom earned through hardship. I realized that pain is inevitable, but how we respond defines us. We can allow it to break us, or we can use it to grow stronger, to become a source of support not only for ourselves, but for others who might one day need our guidance. And then, one night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the phone rang. My heart skipped. For a moment, I froze, imagining it might be him. But it wasn't Ethan. It was someone else, someone I did not know well at the time, someone who would unknowingly remind me that love, patience, and readiness are never wasted. That call, whispered and trembling, would change everything. It would test the limits of my endurance, reshape my understanding of family, and remind me that even when a child rejects you, life has a way of calling you back into their world when they need you most. I did not yet know the details, but I felt in my bones that my patience, my quiet resilience, and my unwavering love would be required sooner than I had imagined, and I would rise to meet it not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. I spent the rest of the night thinking, reflecting, and preparing. My house was still silent, but inside me, determination began to grow. I would not be broken by absence. I would not be erased by harsh words. I would wait silently but strongly for the moment life demanded my return. Because a mother's love does not vanish. It does not fade. It waits. It strengthens. And it acts when it is needed most. The call that shook everything. It was 3 a.m. when the phone rang. The sound cut through the silence of my small apartment like a knife. I had long since accepted that nights were mine alone, that sleep was the only companion I had. My heart raced as I picked up the receiver, fearing another rejection, another reminder of the distance that had grown between my son and me. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice trembling more from anticipation than from fear. Please, you have to help us." The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, delicate, and strained. It belonged to someone I barely knew, yet someone who carried the weight of despair that only comes from being trapped in a life spiraling out of control. It was my daughter-in-law, the woman Ethan had married. I froze. Every muscle in my body taut. My mind spun with questions. Why her? Why now? What had happened that she would call me in the middle of the night, seeking help from the one my son had told to stay away? "Are you okay?" I managed to ask, my voice soft but firm. "No. I don't know what to do," she cried, her words breaking in and out. Ethan, I can't manage him, and I can't handle what's happening. You're the only one I can think of who can help. Please, come." The desperation in her tone was unmistakable. It was the kind of plea that bypassed pride, fear, and anger, reaching straight to the core of human compassion. Despite everything, despite the months of rejection, despite the cold barrier my son had built, I felt a surge of instinctual love and responsibility. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about whether he wanted me or whether this would make me vulnerable. I just acted. I knew that when someone calls for help like that, waiting is not an option. I dressed quickly, grabbing my coat and a bag with essentials. The streets were empty, the city asleep except for the occasional distant siren or hum of a car engine. Every step I took felt like a return to a life I thought had ended, a crossing into a space that I had been barred from, yet was still very much a part of me. When I arrived, the apartment was dark and tense. The door opened before I could knock, and I was met with the anxious, tear-streaked face of her. She pulled me inside without a word, closing the door behind me with a soft click that sounded like a confession. Ethan was there, the man I had raised, nurtured, and protected, the boy whose laughter had once filled my home. And now he was silent, seated in the corner, his expression unreadable, a mixture of anger, shame, and something I could not yet identify. I took a careful step forward, my hands raised slightly, showing no threat, only presence. "I'm here," I said softly. "I want to help. Tell me what's going on." She exhaled shakily, gripping my hands. He's been spiraling. I've tried everything. Therapy, talking, reasoning, but nothing works. He refuses to speak to anyone except you. You're the only one he listens to. Please, Mom, I don't know what else to do. The words hit me with the force of a tidal wave. Despite everything, he had remembered me. He had carried my lessons, my love, my presence within him. Even if he had rejected me verbally, emotionally, in the way only adults can, there was a part of him that still sought me out. I knelt beside him, careful not to impose, careful to let him know he could choose. My heart pounded as I reached out slowly. "Ethan," I said, my voice low but steady, "I'm here. I'm not here to judge or to scold. I'm here to help. Will you let me?" For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing, the quiet hum of the city outside, and the faint click of the radiator. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders began to relax. His eyes, once a wall of frost, softened just enough for me to glimpse the vulnerability beneath. And in that moment, I realized something fundamental. Love doesn't demand acknowledgement to exist. Even when it is ignored, it waits. Even when it is rejected, it remains steadfast. The next hours were a blur of conversation, gentle guidance, and shared tears. He spoke hesitantly at first, revealing fears and frustrations he had buried for months, exposing wounds I had only glimpsed in fragments. I listened without interruption, validating, comforting, and occasionally challenging him when he stumbled into self-destructive patterns. His wife watched, relief mingled with awe, as the son she loved gradually opened up to the mother he had pushed away. It was painful to witness his struggle, yet it was also profoundly beautiful. There is a grace in the unguarded truth, a power in admitting one's weaknesses, and a humility in accepting help. By the time dawn approached, the tension in the room had shifted. The walls that had once divided us now showed cracks, illuminated by the first light of day. It was not reconciliation yet, not full, complete, and perfect, but it was a start. We made plans, small steps toward recovery and reconnection. Therapy sessions, honest daily conversations, boundaries that respected autonomy while allowing care. I promised to remain patient, to let him set the pace while holding him accountable to the lessons I had instilled long ago. As I left the apartment, the sky pale and streaked with pink, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion, hope, and cautious optimism. I understood now that love's power is not in the words we speak, but in the actions we take when they are most needed. Walking home, I reflected on the months of rejection, the silence, the fear, and the loneliness. I realized that life has a way of testing patience, of proving that strength is not measured by the absence of pain, but by the ability to rise through it. That night changed everything. It reminded me that even when doors are slammed, windows can still open. Even when a child pushes away, there is always a path back if we are willing to be patient, steady, and present. And as I turned the key in my own front door, I knew with certainty that motherhood is not defined by distance, words, or resentment. It is defined by enduring love, readiness to act, and the courage to step into the lives of those we nurture even when they have tried to reject us. That was the first day I understood. No matter how far someone pushes you away, the heart remembers, and life eventually calls you back when it matters most. Bridges in silence. The days following that night were heavy, yet filled with a strange sense of purpose. I returned to my apartment carrying more than just the weight of my own emotions. I carried a responsibility I had never expected to bear again. Each step through the familiar halls felt like crossing a threshold, a quiet acknowledgement that life, in all its unpredictable cruelty, still required me. I spent the morning reflecting on the past, tracing the origins of the rift that had grown between Ethan and me. It had not appeared overnight. There had been countless small moments, subtle signs of distance that I had overlooked in the rush of life. A missed call here, a curt reply there. The accumulation of tiny misunderstandings, unspoken expectations, and years of independence clashing with attachment had created a chasm too wide for words alone to bridge. I realized then that part of my pain stemmed from pride, not just his, but mine. As a mother, I had always imagined that love was enough, that my efforts, sacrifices, and unwavering devotion would serve as an invisible anchor, keeping us tethered even through storms. But love, I learned, is not a guarantee. It is a force that must be renewed, respected, and sometimes quietly negotiated. By mid-afternoon, I had begun to plan my approach, not for confrontation, not for chastisement, but for presence. Presence was what had been missing all along, a silent, steady, unwavering presence that did not demand acknowledgement, but allowed for healing. I prepared notes for myself, small reminders of the lessons I had imparted over the years: patience, honesty, humility, and the courage to face one's own failings. When evening fell, I returned to Ethan's apartment. His wife opened the door before I could knock, her expression tense, expectant, and fragile all at once. She led me inside quietly, gesturing for me to sit in the living room. Ethan was there, slouched on the couch, his posture rigid, eyes avoiding mine. The room smelled faintly of coffee and anxiety. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "I'm here," I said softly. "I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to scold. I'm here to help, if you'll let me." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders loosened. He shifted slightly, his gaze flicking to mine for a brief, fleeting second before dropping again. We began with small talk, gentle exchanges that felt almost ceremonial. I asked about his day, his work, his routine. He answered in short sentences, cautious and measured. His wife filled in gaps, her tone pleading, nervous, and relieved all at once. She watched as I listened, as I validated feelings and gently challenged unproductive patterns. Hours passed in this quiet rhythm. Conversation ebbed and flowed, punctuated by pauses heavy with unspoken truths. Gradually, Ethan began to open up, revealing frustrations he had buried under layers of independence, anger, and guilt. Each revelation was a small crack in the wall he had built, a wall that had separated us for months. I refrained from judgment, focusing instead on presence and listening. There were moments when he seemed about to shut down completely, moments when tears threatened to spill but never did. I recognized the signs. I had seen them before in other lives, other struggles. I offered comfort when he faltered, encouragement when he hesitated, and steadfast silence when words were not enough. By the early hours of the morning, the room's tension had shifted. The rigidity of distance gave way to cautious acknowledgement. He was still hesitant, still wary, but he had begun to remember the mother who had nurtured, protected, and loved him unconditionally. His wife, watching quietly, began to relax. The weight she had carried now, shared with someone who understood. The lessons of that night extended beyond reconciliation. I realized that being present does not always mean speaking. Sometimes it means simply existing, silently holding space for the other person to rediscover trust, safety, and love. Healing is rarely immediate. It is slow, incremental, and often invisible until its effects become undeniable. In the following days, we established routines: short conversations in the morning, gentle check-ins in the evening, and structured sessions for more in-depth discussions. We respected boundaries while gently challenging resistance, allowing growth to occur at a natural pace. It was exhausting, emotionally and mentally, yet profoundly fulfilling. I began to notice subtle changes, not just in him, but in myself. I felt stronger, more patient, and more grounded. The months of rejection had tempered my resilience, had forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities, and had taught me the importance of steady, unwavering love. I also reconnected with parts of myself I had neglected: small joys, simple pleasures, and the quiet satisfaction of being needed again began to fill spaces that had felt empty. I realized that my identity had never been defined solely by my role as a mother. It was also shaped by my own choices, my own strength, and my capacity for empathy and compassion. As the weeks turned into months, the relationships within that household began to shift. Ethan's walls continued to show cracks, but he now approached me with tentative trust rather than guarded hostility. His wife, emboldened by our growing connection, took on challenges with greater confidence, knowing she had support she could rely upon. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, he spoke for the first time without hesitation. "Mom, thank you," he said quietly, his voice weighted with unspoken meaning. I didn't realize how much I needed you." The words were simple, but they carried the gravity of months of absence, misunderstanding, and pain. I felt a rush of relief, tempered with the knowledge that rebuilding trust is a continual process, not a single moment of forgiveness. That night, as I walked home, the city lights shimmering on wet asphalt, I reflected on the lessons learned. I understood that relationships are fragile, subject to the forces of pride, independence, and fear. Yet they are also resilient, capable of renewal when nurtured with patience, presence, and unwavering love. Motherhood, I realized, is not defined solely by immediate recognition or reciprocal affection. It is defined by enduring commitment, the courage to remain present, and the willingness to step into lives that may have once rejected us. And in the quiet of that night, as I closed my apartment door behind me, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The journey was far from over, yet I had rediscovered my strength, my voice, and my capacity to influence change. I understood with absolute clarity that love, true, steadfast, patient love, is never wasted, no matter how far it is pushed away. Even in the face of rejection, silence, and distance, it endures. Even when ignored, it waits. Even when challenged, it acts. And so I move forward carrying lessons learned, strength regained, and hope rekindled, ready to meet whatever the future held with courage, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Unspoken truths. The days after our first long night together passed like a slow tide, each one carrying fragments of understanding, hesitation, and fragile hope. Life had shifted subtly, imperceptibly, but enough for me to sense that the dynamic in Ethan's home was beginning to change. I arrived one morning to find him in the kitchen, making coffee with an almost ritualistic precision. His movements were deliberate, careful, and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of our past interactions. The apartment smelled faintly of roasted beans and warm bread, a mundane comfort that felt extraordinary under the circumstances. He looked up when I entered. "Morning," he said, his voice low but steady. There was no hostility, only a guarded neutrality. I smiled softly, taking a seat at the small kitchen table. "Morning," I replied, Coffee smells good." He shrugged, focusing on pouring the liquid into a chipped ceramic mug. I watched him for a moment, noticing the subtle tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. Even now, the barriers were not entirely gone, but for the first time in months, he allowed me into the small routines of his life. His wife emerged from the bedroom, rubbing her eyes, a tired smile on her face. "Mom," she said almost shyly, "thank you for being here. I don't know what I would do without you." Her gratitude was heartfelt, unadorned by pretense. It was a reminder that, even amidst rejection and conflict, there were threads of connection waiting to be acknowledged. We spent the morning discussing practical matters, meals, schedules, and household responsibilities. I offered guidance gently, ensuring that I supported without overstepping boundaries. It was a delicate balance, providing help without imposing, remaining present without controlling. Throughout the day, I observed Ethan quietly. He moved with care, occasionally glancing toward me as if seeking affirmation or perhaps reassurance. I remembered the young boy who had once sought my approval in small, earnest ways, and I realized that beneath the adult exterior, that same child still existed. Later, we sat together in the living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. I asked about his work, his routines, and his relationships with friends and colleagues. He responded cautiously, revealing glimpses of stress and frustration that he had long hidden. Each admission was small, tentative, but it signaled progress. At one point, he paused, his hands gripping the armrests of the couch. I didn't mean to push you away," he admitted quietly. "I thought I was protecting myself or something." I nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. "I understand," I said. "We all try to protect ourselves in different ways, but pushing away the people who care about you, it can hurt them deeply, even if you don't intend it." He looked at me, eyes slightly wide, as if recognizing the truth in my words for the first time. "I didn't realize how much it affected you." "It affected me deeply," I admitted, "but I also understand why you did it. And I'm here now because love isn't about punishment. It's about presence, understanding, and patience." The conversation flowed slowly, sometimes halting, sometimes circling around unspoken topics. I could sense that he was wrestling with emotions he had long buried: anger, guilt, fear, and longing. My role was not to fix him, but to provide a steady anchor, a safe space in which he could confront these feelings without judgment. As evening approached, I prepared dinner alongside his wife. The simple act of cooking together, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and sharing small jokes created a rhythm of domestic intimacy that had been absent for too long. I realized that these moments, the mundane, the ordinary, were as critical to rebuilding connection as any conversation or act of guidance. After dinner, we sat together, reflecting on the day. Ethan's tone was quieter now, more contemplative. "Mom, I know I have a lot to work through," he said. I don't know if I can fix everything overnight." "You don't have to fix it overnight," I replied. "Healing is a process, and it starts with small, consistent steps." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. He was beginning to understand that growth required honesty, courage, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Over the following days, we established routines that fostered communication, accountability, and trust. Mornings were for quiet reflection, afternoons for practical matters, and evenings for conversation and connection. Each day presented challenges, but also opportunities to strengthen the fragile threads that had once been severed. I also encouraged Ethan to express his feelings openly, to articulate frustrations without fear of judgment. This was a delicate process, as he had spent years learning to suppress vulnerability. But with patience and gentle guidance, he began to navigate his emotions more effectively, discovering that acknowledgement could be liberating rather than threatening. His wife, too, grew in confidence, observing the changes in him and realizing her own role in fostering a supportive environment. She expressed gratitude repeatedly, often in quiet moments when she thought no one was watching. I assured her that her efforts mattered, that partnership and mutual respect were critical components of healing. One afternoon, Ethan and I took a walk through the nearby park. The crisp air and soft rustling of leaves created a calm backdrop for our conversation. He spoke about regrets, aspirations, and the fears that had driven him to isolate himself. I listened intently, offering validation and guidance without imposing solutions. We encountered children playing nearby, their laughter ringing through the trees. Ethan paused, watching them with a faint, wistful smile. "I remember when I used to be like that," he said quietly. "Carefree, innocent." "Yes," I replied gently. "And that part of you is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just hidden sometimes. Our job is to help it come forward." The walk lasted for hours, and by the time we returned home, there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He seemed lighter, more willing to engage, more open to connection. His walls were not gone, but cracks had formed that allowed light to seep through. In the following weeks, I continued to provide guidance and support, always mindful of boundaries. We worked on rebuilding trust, repairing communication, and fostering an environment where honesty and vulnerability were not threats, but tools for growth. I also began documenting our progress, noting the small victories alongside the challenges. Each day, I recorded insights, observations, and reflections, creating a roadmap for continued healing. These notes served as reminders that even incremental change, when sustained, could lead to profound transformation. Through it all, I discovered a deeper truth. Love is not diminished by rejection, nor is its impact negated by absence. Even when ignored, it persists, shaping lives in ways that are often invisible, but nonetheless powerful. By the end of the month, Ethan's demeanor had transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. He engaged more openly with his wife, demonstrated greater emotional awareness, and began to accept my presence not as interference, but as support. The tension that had once defined our interactions had softened, replaced by cautious trust and mutual respect. I realized then that the journey of reconciliation was ongoing, never complete, and always requiring patience, empathy, and steadfast commitment. Yet even amidst uncertainty, there was hope, a fragile but resilient hope that connection, understanding, and love could prevail over distance, pride, and fear. As I walked home that night, the city lights reflected in puddles from a recent rain. I felt a profound sense of purpose. I had witnessed the transformative power of presence, patience, and unwavering love. I had learned that even in the face of rejection, silence, and emotional distance, there exists the possibility of renewal, healing, and deeper connection. Motherhood, I understood, is not defined by immediate recognition, reciprocal affection, or unbroken harmony. It is defined by enduring commitment, the courage to remain present, and the willingness to support growth, even when met with resistance. And so I moved forward with clarity, purpose, and hope, ready to continue the journey of healing, knowing that love, patience, and understanding would guide the path ahead. The weight of regret. The morning was quiet, almost painfully so. I woke early, the kind of early where the world outside seems suspended between darkness and light, a liminal space that forces introspection. I sat by the window, a mug of coffee warming my hands, and let my thoughts drift toward the path that had led me here. Regret had a weight all its own. It was not the kind of guilt that demanded punishment or apology. No, it was subtler, more pervasive. A lingering shadow that reminded me of opportunities missed, words unspoken, moments taken for granted. I thought about Ethan and the months of distance, the silence that had grown between us, the cold walls that neither of us had fully understood until now. I recalled the early years, his small hands clutching mine as we walked to school, his laughter echoing in hallways that seemed too small for so much joy, the way his eyes sparkled when he learned something new. I had been present. I had been devoted, yet even the most steadfast love can falter under the weight of expectations, misunderstandings, and human fallibility. As the city slowly awoke, I made my way to Ethan's apartment. His wife answered the door with a tentative smile, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and hope. "He's in the living room," she whispered, as if careful not to disturb fragile equilibrium. I stepped inside, feeling the subtle tension in the air, the unspoken history between us pressing lightly but insistently. Ethan sat on the couch, his posture rigid, hands clasped loosely in his lap. There was a vulnerability in his gaze, a tentative seeking of understanding that had not been present during our previous encounters. I settled into the armchair opposite him, careful to maintain an open posture, signaling patience and presence. "Good morning," I said softly. "How did you sleep?" He shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible movement that hinted at discomfort more than indifference. "I didn't sleep well," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "Thoughts kept me awake." I nodded, understanding immediately. "Your mind has been carrying a lot," I said. "It's natural that sleep becomes difficult when your heart and mind are heavy, but acknowledging it is the first step toward relief." The hours that followed were filled with careful conversation. I listened as he spoke about the pressures of work, the subtle but constant expectations he felt, and the underlying anxiety that had driven his earlier rejection of me. Each word was a revelation, a piece of the puzzle I had been slowly assembling since the first call from his wife. We spoke of regret, not just mine, not just his, but the shared weight of unspoken words, missed opportunities, and the assumptions that had led to misunderstanding. I encouraged him to reflect, to identify the sources of his pain, and to consider how they had influenced his actions. At one point, he paused, staring at his hands. I feel like I've failed," he confessed quietly. "Not just with her, but with myself, and with you." I took a deep breath, letting the words settle between us. "Ethan, recognizing failure is not the same as being defeated. It's a step toward growth, toward understanding, toward change. The fact that you feel regret means you are capable of reflection, and reflection is the foundation of transformation." He looked up, eyes meeting mine for the first time with a clarity that was both hesitant and profound. "I never realized how much my actions hurt you. I thought I was protecting myself, but I see now that I was pushing away the people who love me most." "That recognition is invaluable," I replied. "It's never too late to rebuild. It takes time, effort, and patience, but the bridge can be rebuilt if you are willing to walk it, step by step." Throughout the day, we worked on practical exercises to rebuild communication. Small moments, a shared cup of tea, a brief conversation about a book, an acknowledgement of effort became symbols of progress. I encouraged him to express emotions openly, to accept support without seeing it as weakness, and to approach challenges with honesty and humility. His wife remained a quiet observer, offering gentle support and encouragement. Her presence was a stabilizing force, reminding both of us that growth is not solitary but relational. She began to recognize the ways her own actions could foster trust and connection, learning alongside Ethan and, indirectly, alongside me. By afternoon, the tension that had pervaded the apartment began to lift. Ethan's posture softened, his responses became more reflective and engaged, and the subtle walls that had previously divided us showed signs of fracture. Small gestures, a glance, a nod, a tentative smile spoke volumes about the progress being made. I also noticed a change within myself. The months of rejection, the painful memories, and the weight of absence had tempered my resilience. I felt stronger, more grounded, and more capable of providing the support needed without losing myself in the process. I understood with renewed clarity that love is not diminished by absence. It is strengthened by the commitment to remain present, even when unacknowledged. Later that evening, we walked together through the nearby park. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of early blooms. Children played nearby, their laughter piercing the quiet evening. Ethan watched them for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I remember when I used to play like that," he said quietly, "carefree without worry." "Yes," I replied. "That part of you is still there. It hasn't disappeared. It's just waiting for the right moment to be expressed again, and we can help it resurface." He nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "I want that," he said. "I want to feel that again. And I want to make things right. With you, with her, with myself." The walk continued in silence for a while, comfortable and reflective. By the time we returned to the apartment, the evening had deepened into night, and a subtle but profound shift had occurred. The tension between us had eased, replaced by cautious trust and mutual recognition of shared goals. Over the following weeks, we continued to build routines that encouraged honesty, emotional expression, and consistent engagement. We addressed practical challenges, celebrated small victories, and maintained open channels of communication. Each day brought incremental progress, reinforcing the idea that healing is not immediate, but cumulative. Through this process, I observed the transformative power of presence, patience, and understanding. Even small gestures, a listening ear, a gentle word, an act of consideration, proved capable of bridging gaps that once seemed insurmountable. By the end of the month, the atmosphere in Ethan's home had changed significantly. The rigidity of earlier interactions was replaced by tentative openness. Trust, while fragile, was being rebuilt, and most importantly, the unspoken bond that had always existed beneath layers of pain and miscommunication was becoming visible once more. As I returned to my own apartment that night, I reflected on the journey thus far. Regret, I realized, is a teacher, not a punishment. It illuminates paths toward growth, self-awareness, and deeper connection. Even when love is challenged, even when rejection occurs, the possibility of renewal remains, contingent upon patience, commitment, and unwavering presence. Motherhood, I understood more clearly than ever, is defined not by immediate reciprocation or seamless harmony, but by enduring love, readiness to support, and the courage to remain steadfast through adversity. And so, with the city lights reflecting on the wet streets, I carried forward not only the hope of reconciliation, but the assurance that love, patience, and understanding can heal even the deepest wounds if we are willing to walk the path, step by step, day by day. Threads of trust. The morning light filtered through the blinds, soft and almost tentative, as if the universe itself was cautious about revealing the day to come. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth seep into my hands and, in some small way, into my heart. Trust, I reminded myself, is a fragile thing, built slowly and sometimes destroyed in an instant. Since the night of the phone call, every day had been a careful negotiation of presence, patience, and quiet observation. Ethan's home was gradually becoming a place where dialogue replaced silence, where gestures of care replaced walls of defensiveness. But trust, true, unshakable trust, was still a fragile thread, one misstep away from snapping. I arrived at his apartment mid-morning, greeted once more by the tentative smile of his wife. She led me inside, her expression a blend of relief and lingering anxiety. "He's in the study," she whispered, "but he's been quiet all morning." Quietness was progress. Silence, when chosen, often spoke louder than words. I nodded and moved toward the study, careful to respect his space while signaling readiness to engage. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at a blank notebook. His fingers drummed softly against the surface, a rhythm of contained energy and unspoken thoughts. When he looked up and saw me, there was a moment of hesitation, a microsecond of uncertainty that passed quickly but carried weight. "Morning," I said softly, taking a seat nearby. "How are you feeling today?" He shrugged, a small movement that conveyed both neutrality and a desire to protect himself. "Okay," he muttered. "I guess." I nodded. "That's fair. Okay is often a good place to start." For hours, we worked in companionable silence. I focused on presence, allowing him to occupy his own mental space while subtly guiding him toward reflection. The notebook became a tool, a repository for thoughts, fears, and questions. He wrote in bursts, sometimes pausing to glance at me as if seeking validation, then returning to the page. His wife entered occasionally, bringing tea, a light snack, or a gentle smile. Each interaction reinforced the idea that support can be offered without intrusion, that trust is nurtured through consistency and consideration. By late afternoon, the tension in the room had softened. Ethan began to speak more openly, initially in fragmented sentences, then in more cohesive thoughts. He shared feelings of inadequacy, of guilt, of fear that his actions had irreparably damaged relationships. Each confession was met with calm acknowledgement, a reinforcement that vulnerability is not weakness, but courage. "You know," he said quietly, "I've realized I've been carrying so much, and I didn't even understand it myself. I thought I was managing, but I wasn't." "I can see that," I replied. "The first step is awareness. The next is action guided by honesty and patience. And the final step is forgiveness of others and of yourself." He nodded slowly, the weight of understanding settling on him. The room seemed to breathe differently, lighter, more open, as though each word had lifted a fragment of the burden he had carried silently for so long. Over the next few weeks, our routines became more structured. Mornings were devoted to reflection and journaling, afternoons to practical tasks, and evenings to conversation and shared activities. Each day offered opportunities to reinforce trust, rebuild connections, and foster understanding. I observed subtle changes in Ethan's behavior. He became more attentive to his wife's needs, more responsive to my presence, and increasingly willing to share his thoughts and feelings. The walls that had once defined his interactions with me now bore cracks wide enough for light and warmth to seep through. There were setbacks, of course. Moments of frustration, miscommunication, and withdrawal occurred. But each time, we addressed them calmly, debriefing, reflecting, and reaffirming our commitment to progress. I emphasized that setbacks are natural, that growth is rarely linear, and that resilience is measured by persistence rather than perfection. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, he spoke with a candor that took my breath away. "Mom, I don't think I ever realized how much I needed you," he admitted. "Even when I said I didn't, even when I pushed away, a part of me, I always remembered you." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of months of absence, silence, and misunderstanding. I felt a surge of emotion, tempered by the knowledge that rebuilding trust is ongoing, not instantaneous. "You were always in my heart, Mom," he continued, his voice steadying. I didn't know how to show it. I was afraid, I guess." Fear is a powerful force, one that can shape behavior in ways we often fail to understand until it's confronted. I nodded, acknowledging his truth. "Fear is natural," I said softly, "but it does not define who you are. It's what you do in spite of fear that shapes your path." The next morning, we began a new exercise-open dialogue without judgment. Each family member took turns expressing thoughts and feelings, while the others listened with empathy and restraint. The practice was challenging, requiring honesty, humility, and courage, but it laid the foundation for deeper connection. Ethan gradually began to take initiative. He planned small activities, engaged in thoughtful conversation, and even sought guidance proactively. His wife, observing his efforts, responded with support and encouragement, creating a cycle of positive reinforcement that strengthened the family dynamic. I also encouraged Ethan to reflect on past mistakes, not to dwell on them with shame, but to learn and grow. Each reflection was an opportunity to build self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and the capacity to engage with others more constructively. Through these exercises, I observed a profound transformation. The young man who had once shut me out, who had spoken words of rejection and anger, was slowly reclaiming his emotional center. He was learning to navigate vulnerability, express gratitude, and acknowledge the importance of relationships he had once taken for granted. Evenings became times of shared reflection, quiet conversation, and gentle humor. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then gradually more confident. The atmosphere of tension and apprehension gave way to one of cautious optimism, where each member of the household could engage authentically without fear of judgment or reprisal. By the end of the month, the change was unmistakable. Trust, though still delicate, had been restored in meaningful ways. Communication was more open, emotions more accessible, and connection more consistent. The bonds that had been tested by absence, rejection, and fear were being reinforced through deliberate action, patience, and enduring love. As I walked home one night, the city lights reflecting in puddles on the streets, I reflected on the journey thus far. Trust is not given. It is earned, nurtured, and maintained through consistent presence, honesty, and empathy. Even when relationships are fractured, even when distance and pride create barriers, there exists the potential for restoration if individuals are willing to engage with patience, humility, and unwavering commitment. Motherhood, I realized, extends far beyond childhood. It is not confined to the years of physical proximity, shared routines, or daily supervision. True motherhood endures through emotional distance, challenges, and the test of time. It is defined by steadfast love, presence, and the courage to intervene when needed, regardless of past rejection or hardship. That night, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be long, requiring patience, persistence, and continuous reflection. But I was ready. And more importantly, Ethan was beginning to realize that love, understanding, and trust are not static. They are cultivated through action, attention, and the willingness to embrace vulnerability. Walls crumbling. The apartment was quiet when I arrived that morning, the kind of quiet that could feel oppressive or soothing depending on the weight it carried. Today, it felt like a fragile promise, a promise that things could be different, that trust could be rebuilt, that hearts, even when broken or guarded, could slowly open. Ethan was sitting on the couch, a notebook open on his lap, pen hovering hesitantly above the page. His wife appeared in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee, her movements careful and precise. Both of them seemed aware of the subtle tension in the air, aware that today might bring new revelations, whether gentle or jarring. I settled into the armchair across from him, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel comfortable, but not so long that it became unbearable. "Good morning," I said softly. "How are you feeling today?" He shrugged, eyes on the notebook. "I'm okay," he muttered, almost under his breath. There was a hesitation in his tone, a pause before the words, as if he were carefully measuring their impact. "Okay is a good place to start," I said. "It's honest, and honesty is the foundation of everything we're trying to build." For hours, we worked quietly. Ethan wrote, paused, and then spoke softly about thoughts and feelings he had long suppressed. His words were fragmented at first, hesitant and cautious, but as time passed, they began to form a coherent narrative of frustration, guilt, and longing. Each sentence, each carefully chosen word, was a small victory proof that walls could crumble when patience, presence, and empathy were applied consistently. His wife joined the conversation intermittently, offering gentle observations and reminders of progress. Her presence was stabilizing, reminding Ethan that he was not alone, that he had support beyond my own efforts. Slowly, the dynamic shifted. The air, once heavy with tension, became lighter, carrying the subtle but undeniable scent of change. We discussed the past openly, not to assign blame, but to understand the forces that had driven distance, silence, and rejection. I encouraged Ethan to consider how fear, pride, and miscommunication had influenced his decisions. By naming these forces, he began to recognize their power over his actions and their effect on relationships. At one point, he paused, pen still in hand. I never wanted to hurt you, he admitted, voice low but clear. I thought I was protecting myself, but I see now. I was wrong. The words hit me like a physical force, a mixture of relief, pain, and profound understanding. I know, I said softly. We all make decisions based on the understanding we have at the time. What matters is that you recognize the impact and take steps to move forward differently. The conversation flowed into discussions about responsibility, accountability, and forgiveness. Ethan began to articulate feelings he had long avoided: guilt over neglect, fear of inadequacy, frustration with his own behavior. Each confession was met with calm acknowledgement and gentle guidance, reinforcing that vulnerability was not weakness but strength. Later, we moved to practical matters. I guided them through organizing routines, balancing work and domestic responsibilities, and establishing communication practices that encouraged openness. Small steps repeated consistently began to create patterns of trust and reliability. Ethan's behavior began to shift subtly. He checked in with his wife more often, shared details of his day without prompting, and expressed gratitude for the support he received. The walls that had once defined his interactions with me softened, showing cracks wide enough for connection to grow. Evenings became opportunities for reflection. We discussed moments of frustration, celebrated small victories, and explored ways to navigate future challenges. Humor returned gradually, tentative but genuine, filling spaces that had been heavy with tension and fear. One evening, as the city outside darkened, Ethan spoke with remarkable candor. "Mom, I think I finally understand how much I pushed you away," he said, "even when I didn't mean to. Even when I told myself I didn't care, a part of me always did." The words were simple, but their weight was immense. I felt a surge of emotion, tempered by the knowledge that rebuilding trust is ongoing. It cannot be forced, only nurtured through consistent action and unwavering presence. We continued this process over the following weeks. Journals, conversations, shared activities, and consistent check-ins created a rhythm that reinforced trust. Setbacks occurred, of course, moments of withdrawal, irritability, and hesitation, but each was addressed calmly, with reflection and reaffirmation of commitment. Through these interactions, I observed a profound transformation. Ethan, once distant and guarded, was reclaiming emotional depth, empathy, and connection. His wife, strengthened by his progress, became a more confident partner, reinforcing the household's new dynamic of cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. By the end of the month, the changes were undeniable. Walls that had seemed impenetrable now showed clear openings. Communication was more open, emotions more accessible, and relationships more resilient. The family, once fractured by distance, fear, and pride, was slowly, deliberately finding its rhythm. Walking home that night, the city lights reflecting on wet streets, I reflected on the lessons learned. Trust is built incrementally through patience, consistency, and empathetic presence. Even when relationships are strained or fractured, restoration is possible if individuals are willing to engage authentically and vulnerably. Motherhood, I realized, is defined not by immediate acknowledgement or perfection, but by enduring love, steadfast presence, and the courage to step into lives that may resist connection. It is the willingness to offer guidance, support, and patience, even when faced with rejection or indifference. And so, with the night quiet around me, I carried forward a renewed sense of purpose. I knew the journey was far from over, yet I also knew that progress, even slow and fragile, is worth every effort. Love, patience, and understanding remain the most powerful tools we have to rebuild what once seemed irreparable. Breaking the silence. The morning light was diffused, soft through the apartment blinds. Like it, too, was tentative about entering the space we had been rebuilding. Silence had a strange way of settling into rooms, and in Ethan's apartment it carried memories of absence, of rejection, of words unspoken, but also of potential. Potential for connection, for understanding, for trust to bloom. I arrived mid-morning, coffee in hand, greeted by the familiar quiet. His wife opened the door with a careful smile, as though unsure if this day would bring progress or frustration. "He's in the study," she whispered. "He's been thinking, I think. You might want to just sit and listen." I nodded. Presence, I reminded myself, was more powerful than words. I entered the study slowly, allowing my movements to be deliberate, non-threatening. Ethan sat at the desk, a pen poised over a blank sheet of paper, fingers tapping lightly against the surface. His gaze lifted briefly, acknowledging me, then returned to the page as if weighing whether to invite me into his thoughts. "Good morning," I said softly. "How are you feeling today?" He shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. I don't know," he admitted. "I've been thinking." "That's good," I said, settling into the chair opposite him. "Reflection is the first step toward clarity. Sometimes thinking leads to understanding we didn't know we needed." Hours passed in a rhythm of quiet presence and occasional gentle conversation. Ethan wrote, then paused, then shared snippets of thought, frustrations, fears, regrets, and the burdens he had carried silently for months. Each admission, though small, was monumental in the context of our journey. Walls that had seemed impermeable now displayed cracks, letting light through for the first time in a long while. His wife brought intermittent encouragement, silently affirming his efforts without pressuring or guiding too forcefully. The environment was careful, intentional, safe enough for vulnerability, structured enough to allow accountability. Eventually, Ethan paused, looking at me with a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. "Mom, I never realized how much silence could hurt," he said. "How much it could make someone feel invisible." "I know," I said softly. "Silence can be heavy, but acknowledging it, understanding it, and choosing to respond differently, that is what creates change." We spoke about fear, pride, and emotional patterns that had shaped his life and interactions. I encouraged reflection, guiding him to consider how these forces influenced his choices, relationships, and self-perception. Each realization, once voiced, became a stepping stone toward rebuilding trust and emotional intimacy. Later, we discussed responsibility and accountability. "I want to be better," he admitted. "For her, for you, for myself. But I don't know if I can undo the past." "You can undo the past," I said, "but you can shape the present and the future. It's the steps you take now that define what comes next." Small actions became the foundation for progress. Short conversations, shared tasks, and consistent routines created patterns that reinforce trust. Even minor gestures, a cup of coffee offered without request, a thoughtful question, an acknowledgement of effort strengthened our connection. As the day wore on, I encouraged Ethan to explore his emotions honestly, expressing both gratitude and regret. This exercise was challenging, requiring courage and self-awareness, but it allowed him to see that vulnerability could coexist with strength. Evenings became times for reflection and gentle dialogue. Humor returned slowly, tentative at first, then more confident, replacing tension with warmth and lightness. Moments of miscommunication occurred, but each was addressed with calm conversation, reflection, and reaffirmation of commitment to growth. One evening, as the city outside glimmered with streetlights, Ethan said quietly, "Mom, I think I understand now. Even when I pushed you away, part of me wanted you there. I just didn't know how to let it happen." The words were simple but carried the gravity of months of distance, rejection, and internal conflict. I felt both relief and a profound understanding that rebuilding trust is a journey, not an event. Over the following weeks, we maintained routines that fostered communication, empathy, and accountability. Journaling, shared reflection, and structured conversations became tools for reinforcing trust. Setbacks happened, moments of withdrawal, irritability, and fear. But each was met with patience and deliberate engagement, reinforcing that progress is rarely linear but always possible. Through these practices, I observed transformation. Ethan, once distant and guarded, was reclaiming emotional depth, empathy, and connection. His wife became a stronger, more confident partner, participating in the household's evolving dynamic of trust and collaboration. By the month's end, the family environment had shifted significantly. Walls were not fully gone, but openings allowed light, laughter, and dialogue. Trust was fragile yet tangible, and connection, once dormant, was now alive. Walking home that night, the streets reflecting city lights in puddles from a recent rain, I reflected on lessons learned. Trust, I realized, is built incrementally through presence, honesty, and empathy. Even when relationships are fractured, renewal is possible if participants engage authentically, with patience and courage. Motherhood, I understood more deeply than ever, is defined by steadfast love and presence, not by immediate recognition or perfect harmony. It requires courage, patience, and willingness to intervene, even when faced with rejection or indifference. As I reached my apartment, I carried forward clarity and hope, ready to continue guiding, supporting, and nurturing, knowing that love, patience, and understanding remain the most powerful tools for healing and connection. Full circle. The morning sun spilled through the blinds like cautious optimism, soft and unassuming, touching every corner of Ethan's apartment. Today, the air felt different. There was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. The weight of tension had lessened, replaced by cautious hope and a growing willingness to engage openly. I arrived mid-morning, coffee in hand, greeted by the familiar smile of his wife. "He's in the living room," she whispered, a note of relief in her voice. "He's been thinking." I nodded, understanding that this day might hold important breakthroughs. Presence, I reminded myself, was far more powerful than words alone. I entered the room slowly, taking a seat across from him, allowing silence to stretch just long enough for trust to anchor itself. Ethan sat with a notebook in his lap, pen poised above the page. His fingers drummed lightly against the cover, a subtle rhythm of nervous energy and anticipation. When his gaze met mine, I saw a mixture of uncertainty, vulnerability, and readiness, a delicate balance that signaled the potential for progress. "Good morning," I said softly. "How are you feeling today?" He shrugged, a small, hesitant gesture. I'm not sure. I've been thinking a lot," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "That's a good place to start," I replied. Reflection is often the first step toward clarity and understanding. It helps us see not only where we've been, but also where we want to go. We began with small, deliberate exercises in communication. He wrote down thoughts, feelings, and fears, then shared them aloud. Initially, his words were fragmented, cautious, and measured, But as the morning unfolded, they became increasingly coherent and emotionally expressive, revealing a depth of reflection he had previously avoided. His wife participated intermittently, offering support without intrusion. Her presence reinforced the concept that trust and growth are nurtured within a safe, consistent environment. Each small acknowledgement, a nod, a smile, or a whispered word of encouragement strengthened the fragile threads of connection that had been slowly weaving themselves throughout the past months. Hours passed as we navigated the landscape of past mistakes, missed opportunities, and the unspoken emotions that had driven distance and rejection. Ethan began to articulate guilt, fear, and frustration, confronting the emotional patterns that had shaped his behavior. Each revelation was met with calm acknowledgement and gentle guidance, reinforcing the idea that vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. At one point, he paused, eyes lifting from the notebook. "Mom, I never realized how much my silence hurt," he said quietly. "I thought I was protecting myself, but I see now I was pushing away the people I love most." "I know," I replied gently, and recognizing that is the first step toward change. Awareness precedes action, and your willingness to reflect shows growth and courage. The conversation gradually shifted from past regrets to future intentions. Ethan spoke about rebuilding relationships, expressing gratitude, and actively participating in the household dynamic. He acknowledged the role of patience, humility, and consistent effort in fostering trust. Later, we focused on practical routines to reinforce emotional growth. Morning reflections, structured dialogue, and shared responsibilities created a framework for trust and cooperation. Small gestures, preparing meals, asking thoughtful questions, acknowledging efforts became vital symbols of progress. Ethan's wife observed the changes with cautious optimism. She noticed his willingness to engage, his increased attentiveness, and his growing capacity for empathy. Together, we navigated challenges, celebrated victories, and reinforced patterns of trust and connection. Evenings became a time for reflection and shared experiences. Laughter returned, hesitant at first, then gradually more natural, weaving warmth into the fabric of the household. Miscommunications were addressed calmly, fostering resilience and reinforcing that setbacks are opportunities for learning, not failure. One night, as the city lights shimmered through rain-soaked streets, Ethan spoke with a quiet sincerity. "Mom, I think I finally understand," he said. "Even when I pushed you away, part of me wanted you there. I just didn't know how to let it happen." The words carried immense weight. They embodied months of struggle, reflection, and incremental progress. I felt relief and profound understanding that rebuilding trust is a continuous process requiring presence, patience, and empathy. Over the following weeks, routines solidified. Journaling, dialogue, shared responsibilities, and emotional reflection became habitual, creating a resilient environment of mutual respect and trust. Setbacks occurred, as they always do, but each was met with calm, deliberate attention, reinforcing the value of consistency and presence. Through these practices, transformation became evident. Ethan, once guarded and distant, displayed emotional depth, vulnerability, and empathy. His wife grew confident, recognizing her role in reinforcing a supportive household dynamic. Together, they navigated challenges with a newfound sense of teamwork and mutual respect. By the end of the month, the family had reached a pivotal point. Walls, once seemingly impenetrable, were now punctuated with openings that allowed light, dialogue, and trust to flow. Communication was more transparent, emotions more accessible, and relationships more resilient. The household, once fractured by pride, fear, and distance, now functioned as a cohesive unit committed to growth and understanding. Walking home one evening, the reflection of city lights and puddles mirrored the journey we had undertaken. Trust, I realized, is earned incrementally through presence, empathy, and consistent engagement. Even fractured relationships can heal when approached with patience, humility, and deliberate care. Motherhood, I understood more profoundly than ever, extends beyond physical proximity or immediate recognition. It is defined by enduring love, steadfast presence, and the courage to support growth, even when faced with rejection or emotional distance. As I closed my apartment door behind me that night, I felt a sense of closure, but also readiness for the future. The journey was far from over, yet progress had been made, lessons learned, and hope restored. Love, patience, and understanding had proven their transformative power once again. Ethan and his wife together had begun to navigate life with renewed clarity, mutual respect, and deeper connection. The silence that once separated us had given way to dialogue, understanding, and emotional intimacy. What had started as rejection had evolved into an opportunity for growth, healing, and lasting reconciliation. I knew that challenges would continue to arise, that setbacks would test resilience, and that the work of building trust is ongoing. But the foundation we had established through consistent presence, deliberate empathy, and unwavering commitment was strong enough to endure. Motherhood, love, and presence. These forces, I realized, are never wasted. Even in the face of rejection, silence, and distance, they persist, shape lives, and restore what was once broken. And so, with renewed strength and unwavering faith in the power of connection, I carried forward into the next chapter of life, confident in the knowledge that love, when patient and steadfast, can heal even the deepest wounds. Facing the past. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. I walked to Ethan's apartment with a quiet sense of determination. The work we had done so far had laid a fragile but promising foundation, yet I knew that to move forward fully, we needed to confront not just the present, but the echoes of the past. Those moments of misunderstanding, regret, and unresolved tension that had shaped the current landscape of our relationship. As I entered, his wife greeted me with a tentative smile, carrying the quiet energy of someone cautiously hopeful. "He's in the study," she whispered. "He's been going over some old letters. I think he's ready to talk." The study smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Ethan sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of letters and notes from years gone by. His gaze lifted briefly as I approached, hesitant, almost weighing whether my presence was welcome. I offered a gentle smile, a silent assurance that I was here not to judge, but to listen. "Good morning," I said softly. "How are you feeling today?" He shrugged, his posture tense but not defensive. "I've been thinking," he admitted, voice low but steady, "about everything, about us, about what I said, what I did." "That's a start," I said. "Reflection is the first step toward understanding, and understanding is the key to moving forward." For hours, we sifted through old letters, some written in haste, some carefully penned with emotion. Each piece carried a fragment of the past unspoken feelings, unacknowledged struggles, moments of pride and fear that had driven his behavior. We read them aloud, pausing to discuss, analyze, and reflect. "You see," I explained gently, "the past is not something to be punished for. It's a teacher. Each word, each choice, each mistake carries a lesson, a guide for how to act differently in the future." Ethan nodded slowly, eyes tracing the lines of a letter written years ago. I never realized how much I hurt you," he said quietly. "I thought I was protecting myself. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You did what you knew at the time," I replied softly. "But now, with awareness, you have the power to make different choices. That's what matters." The conversation flowed naturally, alternating between reflection and practical guidance. I encouraged him to explore the emotional roots of his past actions, the fear, pride, and insecurity that had driven him to push away those who cared most. Each acknowledgement, each moment of honesty, became a step toward healing. Later, we turned our attention to the present. How could he express love, gratitude, and connection now? How could he rebuild trust with his wife, with me, and ultimately with himself? These were difficult questions, requiring courage, humility, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Ethan's wife contributed thoughtfully, offering perspective, reminders of progress, and gentle encouragement. Her presence was stabilizing, reinforcing that trust and growth are relational, not solitary endeavors. We discussed practical strategies, scheduled reflections, daily conversations, journaling, and small acts of kindness, even simple gestures, a note of gratitude, an offer to help with chores, a heartfelt apology, became symbolic and transformative. By late afternoon, the atmosphere had shifted. The tension that had long defined the room had eased. Walls, once impenetrable, now had cracks. Trust was still fragile but tangible. Dialogue, laughter, and small moments of understanding now punctuated the household. "I want to do better," Ethan said quietly, almost to himself. "For you, for her, for me. I want to fix what I can, to be better than I was." "You already are," I said softly. Acknowledgement, reflection, and commitment to change are powerful steps. Keep moving forward, the rest will follow. Over the following days, we implemented the routines we had discussed. Mornings were for reflection and journaling, afternoons for shared tasks, and evenings for dialogue and connection. Each repetition strengthened patterns of trust and reliability. Setbacks occurred, as they always do. Moments of withdrawal, irritability, or misunderstanding tested our patience, but each instance became an opportunity for reflection and reinforcement, reminding all of us that growth is rarely linear and that resilience is built through persistence. Through these exercises, I witnessed a profound transformation. Ethan, once distant and guarded, was beginning to reclaim emotional depth, empathy, and connection. His wife, empowered by his efforts, became a confident, supportive partner. Together, they navigated challenges with increasing skill and understanding. By the end of the month, the family dynamic had shifted significantly. The home, once heavy with silence and tension, now carried a quiet warmth. Trust was still delicate, but it had a foundation strong enough to endure setbacks and strengthen over time. The bonds that had been strained by fear, pride, and misunderstanding were being reinforced through deliberate, consistent effort. Walking home one evening, I reflected on the journey. Trust, patience, and presence are not passive. They are active choices made every day. Even in the face of rejection, distance, and misunderstanding, love has the power to heal, transform, and restore. Motherhood, I realized, extends far beyond physical proximity or immediate acknowledgement. It is defined by unwavering love, the courage to intervene, and the commitment to nurture growth, even when faced with resistance. As I reached my apartment, I felt a sense of accomplishment tempered by humility. The path of healing is ongoing, requiring patience, understanding, and steadfast presence. But the progress we had made, the lessons learned, and the trust rebuilt were profound reminders that love, when applied with intention and care, can bridge even the deepest divides. Ethan and his wife, together, had begun to navigate life with renewed clarity, empathy, and connection. The silence that once dominated their interactions had been replaced by dialogue, understanding, and emotional intimacy. What began as rejection had evolved into opportunity for growth, for healing, and for love to flourish once more. Motherhood, presence, and patience. These forces had guided the transformation. Even amidst setbacks, they persisted, reshaping relationships and restoring what had been broken. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, I embraced the journey ahead, confident that the bonds of family, strengthened by understanding, empathy, and enduring love, could withstand the tests of time, adversity, and the complexities of the human heart. Epilogue. A new dawn. The morning sun spilled gently across the apartment, painting everything in soft gold. For the first time in years, the home felt alive, not just with activity, but with warmth, understanding, and the quiet hum of trust restored. Ethan moved through the space with a calm confidence, his eyes no longer clouded with defensiveness or regret, but reflecting clarity, empathy, and a genuine desire to connect. His wife, smiling softly, set the table for breakfast. Their laughter mingled easily now, free of hesitation, and I, standing in the doorway, felt a deep sense of peace. The pain of the past, the months of silence, the words that had once wounded me, none of it disappeared, but it had transformed. It had become a foundation, a reminder that even broken bonds can be rebuilt when love, patience, and understanding guide the way. We had all learned lessons that would stay with us forever, that rejection does not erase love, that vulnerability is strength, that forgiveness is a gift we give not only to others, but to ourselves. I saw in Ethan a man who had learned to embrace his emotions rather than fear them, a son who now understood the depth of his mother's care, and a husband who truly valued his partnership. As I sipped my coffee that morning, the city waking outside, I reflected on our journey. Life does not always go as we expect. There are moments when those we love push us away, moments when words cut deeper than we imagine, and moments when silence feels like a chasm. But love, true and steadfast, endures. It adapts, it waits, it nurtures, and it heals. I realize that motherhood is not measured by proximity or perfection, but by presence, resilience, and unwavering care. It is the courage to step in when needed, the patience to wait without resentment, and the strength to forgive without losing oneself. Ethan came over, standing beside me, and gently took my hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything, for not giving up on me, on us." I smiled, feeling the years of pain and hope converge in that single moment. "You don't have to thank me," I replied softly. "You did the hard work. You chose to grow, to learn, to heal. That is the real gift." And as the sun rose higher, filling the room with light, I understood life's challenges, its rejections, its heartaches. They do not define us. It is how we respond, how we nurture the relationships that matter, and how we choose love over fear every single day. The past, with all its mistakes and regrets, had taught us the most valuable lesson of all, that connection, forgiveness, and understanding are worth every struggle. And in that morning light, we all stood together, not as fractured souls, but as a family strengthened by trials, healed by patience, and united by love. The door to the past was no longer a source of pain. It had become a gateway to a future filled with hope, compassion, and the quiet joy of being present in one another's lives. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace.